Something in this morning's coverage really stopped me in my tracks, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it all day. Overnight, oil prices surged all the way up to $112 a barrel. Here in America, the average price of gas has climbed to $4.30 per gallon. The UK Parliament released a briefing this week that painted a very sobering picture. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical energy arteries in the world, is now running at just 5% of its normal shipping volume. 5%. The International Energy Agency has called this the single largest supply disruption in the entire history of the global oil market. And yet, even with all of this chaos, something very specific continues to happen without interruption. China's shadow fleet is still moving. Tankers are still quietly transferring cargo off the coast of Malaysia. Refineries in Shandong province are still processing Iranian crude day after day. The system hasn't stopped. And there's one number that keeps standing out to me more than anything else: 90%. 90% of all the oil that Iran produces right now is going directly to China. This isn't a guess. It's confirmed by US government data and major international reporting. While the rest of the world is paying $112 a barrel, China is buying the overwhelming majority of Iran's oil at a significant discount. Let me paint the full picture for you so you can really see what's happening here. To the outside world, the Strait of Hormuz looks almost completely shut down. But for China, it's operating at 90% capacity when it comes to Iranian supply. Xi Jinping publicly called for the strait to be reopened 10 days ago. Iran did not listen, yet China is still getting the oil. This gap between what China says publicly and what China is actually receiving privately is, I believe, the most important story in this entire conflict. And it's one that's not being explained clearly enough. Let's start by correcting a common misunderstanding about what's actually happening in the strait. Most people picture a closed strait like a locked gate. Ships arrive, find it blocked, and simply turn around. But that's not the reality on the water. What's happening is far more sophisticated. The strait isn't fully closed. It's being carefully controlled. Yes, overall, commercial traffic has dropped by more than 90% compared to pre-war levels. That part is true, but the drop is very uneven. It mainly affects Western-linked shipping, major regulated exporters, and ships operating under normal insurance and compliance rules. Running quietly underneath that visible collapse is an entirely parallel system. Iranian-linked tankers and vessels with opaque ownership structures are still moving through the strait, often with the quiet tolerance of Iranian naval forces. In March alone, more than 16 million barrels made it through under these special conditions, nearly all of it destined for China. So, while the world sees a crisis, pays record prices, and struggles with shortages, China is quietly securing discounted Iranian oil on a market where Brent crude sits above $100. The savings for China are substantial. They're getting this oil for roughly $12 less per barrel than the current global benchmark price. With the volume they're moving, between 1.1 and 1.7 million barrels per day, that discount translates into daily savings of somewhere between $13 million and $20 million. Now let me explain exactly how this system actually works, because understanding the physical infrastructure changes how you see every diplomatic statement coming out of Beijing. The key location is an area about 43 miles off the coast of Malaysia, in what's known as the Eastern Outer Port Limits. In normal times, this was just a standard anchorage where ships waited for space in Singapore's busy ports. Since this conflict began, it has transformed into something else entirely. What investigators have called a floating gas station for Iranian oil. Satellite imagery shows hundreds of tankers loitering in this zone at any given time. Iranian vessels arrive with their tracking systems turned off. They transfer their cargo ship to ship to other tankers with cleaner documentation. Those receiving vessels then continue on to Chinese ports, often declaring the oil as coming from different sources. This hub has been operating continuously since February 28th, completely unaffected by strikes, blockades, ceasefires, or diplomatic talks. And here's something very few people are connecting. While America's military and diplomatic focus has been locked on the Persian Gulf, China made a strategic move in the South China Sea. They expanded their control over Scarborough Shoal, a disputed reef located well within the Philippines' recognized economic zone. This is the advantage of strategic patience. While the United States was distracted with carriers, diplomacy, and military operations in the Gulf, China used that window to strengthen its position in the waters that matter most for its long-term objectives, particularly around Taiwan. Xi Jinping continues to say publicly that Hormuz should be opened. That statement serves a purpose. It positions China as a responsible global player. But the private reality shows a different picture. The systems China built long before this war allow them to keep benefiting even while the strait remains restricted. President Trump has shown signs that he understands parts of this dynamic. He recently mentioned that he thought he had an understanding with Xi regarding certain shipments, but that understanding wasn't honored. His response was quite revealing. He simply shrugged and said, "That's the way war goes, right?" America appears to know China isn't fully cooperating, but pushing too hard right now would risk derailing important upcoming talks. So the situation continues. At the same time, Xi Jinping would genuinely prefer the strait to be fully open. China's overall crude oil and gas imports actually fell in March compared to the previous year. The disruption is beginning to create real pressure on their economy. Their recovery remains fragile, and replacing diverse Gulf supplies has proven difficult. They're managing for now with discounted Iranian oil through the shadow fleet and increased supplies from Russia. But this creates new dependencies and medium-term vulnerabilities. Some observers have noted that this crisis might ultimately speed up China's shift toward green energy. Since China already dominates the manufacturing of solar panels and electric vehicles, any global movement away from Middle Eastern oil could play to their advantage in the long run. But right now, on day 63 of this conflict, the situation is clear. China cannot force Hormuz open. Iran has not listened to their public calls. Yet, China has built enough parallel systems that they don't actually need the strait to be fully operational to keep their economy moving. Before the war, China was receiving around 5.35 million barrels per day through Hormuz from various Gulf producers. Today, that figure has dropped to approximately 1.22 million barrels, almost entirely Iranian oil. They've lost over 4 million barrels of their previous normal supply, but they've adapted through careful preparation. While the rest of the world pays $112 a barrel, China is effectively paying closer to $100. And the transfer hub off Malaysia is where that difference is quietly realized every single day. There's one final dimension I want to share with you before we finish. While the world has been focused on tanker movements in the Persian Gulf, China has been doing something much deeper. They've been treating this entire conflict as a real-world training exercise for their military and strategic planners. They're carefully studying American carrier operations, missile defense performance, logistics patterns, and decision-making cycles under pressure. Every detail revealed in the Gulf is being analyzed and stored for potential future scenarios, particularly anything involving Taiwan. America deployed 3 carrier groups. America showed how its systems respond to sustained attacks. America even moved advanced defenses from other regions, temporarily exposing other areas. China observed all of this without firing a single shot or committing any forces. And while doing so, they still advanced their position in the South China Sea. This is strategic patience executed at the highest level. China didn't start this war. They didn't fund it. They didn't fight in it. Yet they've managed to extract enormous strategic and economic value from it in just 63 days. The Dark Fleet, the transfer hubs, the relationships with Russia, the strategic reserves, all of these systems were built and refined long before this conflict began. Xi Jinping cannot open Hormuz. That much is obvious, but he also doesn't need to in order for China to survive this period. Watch China's April import numbers when they're released next month. Those figures will tell you more about the real balance of power in this war than any official statement ever could. The world is paying $112 a barrel. China is paying $100. And the system they prepared for years continues to run. I'll see you in the next one.